Hello, I'm Elizabeth Broderick, Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner. I'd love to be with you in person today, but I'm here in the United Nations in New York at the 56th Commission on the Status of Women. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which you're meeting today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And thank you also to the organisers of the event, and particularly to Angelus Morningstar. I was really delighted to be asked to be able to speak with you today and to share the stage, well, at least virtually, with two such eminent speakers as Michael Kirby and Boris Dietrich. Firstly, I want to be clear. LGBTI rights are human rights. That means that all international human rights treaties apply to gay, lesbian, transsexual and intersex individuals without discrimination. This was confirmed in March 2007 in the Yogyakarta Principles, developed by a group of human rights experts. And it has also been confirmed by the United Nations Human Rights Council, which has been very clear that the fundamental human right to non-discrimination and to equality before the law apply to LGBTI people. Last June, we watched as the first ever UN resolution on human rights, sexual orientation and gender identity was made at a resolution at the UN Human Rights Council. Then just a few months ago, we saw the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights release the first ever report on the human rights of LGBTI people, particularly dealing with violence. Yet we all know that human rights are very often not respected when it comes to LGBTI people. And with this in mind today, what I want to do is I thought to talk about the human rights position here in Australia and the protection, to talk a little about the role of the Australian Human Rights Commission, and also to talk about what else needs to change. In Australia, even though every state and territory has anti-discrimination laws which protect against discrimination on the basis of sexuality, sex identity or gender identity, there is no protection in federal anti-discrimination law. That said, the Australian government has made public commitments to include this into laws that are currently being reviewed. In fact, the submission process to the Attorney General's Department's discussion paper about the consolidation of our anti-discrimination laws has just closed on February the 1st, and we're hoping that the process will now be a quick process. One of the primary functions of the Human Rights Commission then is to investigate complaints of discrimination or breaches of human right. And in many cases, these can be resolved by what we call a process of conciliation. That is where two parties are brought together by the Commission and by highly skilled lawyers at the Commission who play an impartial role as a conciliator to help parties negotiate a mutually agreed outcome. But it is a very limited ambit that we have. Let me briefly illustrate the difference between the way sexual orientation and sex and/or gender identity are treated in this process, using some examples of real complaints that have come into the Commission. When it comes to sexual orientation, we can only investigate those complaints that are in the area of employment. So, for example, we received a complaint where a woman working for a health food store, and let's call her Gina, she claimed that the day after she advised a colleague that she was bisexual, her employment was terminated. The store denied that it had discriminated against Gina by terminating her employment because of her sexual orientation. And the two parties were brought together in a conciliation. And in this case, an outcome of positive change was achieved with an agreement by the company that they would implement equal opportunity training. On the other hand, in the case of sex and/or gender identity, there are currently no grounds at all for a complaint under the Commissions Act, even in the area of employment. However, even in these cases, it may be possible that a complaint can be investigated because it involves a breach of other discrimination laws or human rights. For example, one such right is the human right of freedom of movement. In 2009, we received a complaint on behalf of trans people from an individual who I'm going to call Paul. Now, Paul claimed that the Commonwealth Government's policy of not issuing a passport recognising a person's affirmed sex unless the trans individual had undergone a surgical procedure breached the human right of freedom of movement. Fortunately, this complaint was also resolved at a conciliation conference, and the outcome achieved was that DFAT not only agreed to amend its standard exceptions policy on certain grounds, but they also undertook to develop a new training package for passport interviewing officers using material that Paul was able to provide on the sex and gender diverse community. But even when there are grounds for complaint under our Act, like in Gina's case, not all complaints result in an agreed outcome. When this happens, if we decide discrimination has occurred, then we can, through the President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, table a report in the Commonwealth Parliament making recommendations. The only, I suppose, limiting thing with this approach is that these recommendations are not enforceable, which is precisely why we need increased protections in federal anti-discrimination laws. These existing gaps in the federal anti-discrimination laws are shameful, and we welcome effective change, and we're hoping that that will move ahead very, very quickly. But I am optimistic that things are changing, and the Commission is working hard to ensure that that happens. Now, many of you will know about the Commission's 2006 National Inquiry into laws which discriminate against same-sex couples and their children in the arena of financial and work-related entitlements and benefits. At the end of 2008, the Australian Government amended as many as 84 laws which discriminated against same-sex couples in a wide range of areas. I mean, those areas were things like taxation, social security, employment, Medicare, veterans affairs, superannuation, workers' compensation and family law. And in 2008, the Commission also undertook a project which some of you may know about. It was called the Sex Files, and it looked into the difficulties faced by sex and gender diverse people in obtaining legal recognition of sex on documents and government records. We recommended government take action to make it easier for people to have their documents amended. And though we are still waiting for a comprehensive response from government, and of course further action, it was reassuring when DFAT announced changes to the passport policy in September last year. Under their new guidelines, a person is no longer required to have undergone sex reassignment surgery in order to be issued with a passport in their preferred gender, which makes it significantly easier and safer for all people to apply for a passport. The courts are another avenue by which we can help effect change here in Australia in relation to these areas. The Commission can assist a court in discrimination issues, or with a court's leave, we can intervene in cases which raise human rights issues. One important example where we intervened is in the case of AB and AH, who were two female-to-male trans people. That case centred on a decision of the Gender Reassignment Board of Western Australia to refuse to grant a recognition certificate to both AB and also AH. The High Court's decision in this case recognised that a person does not need to have surgery to receive legal recognition of their affirmed sex in Western Australia. Our hope is therefore that this will influence other jurisdictions to amend their requirements, and that ultimately there will be a common system of legal recognition of the affirmed sex of trans people throughout the entire nation. So I hope you agree with me when I say that things are changing, and I do have high hopes for the future. But even with all the work that's taking place, the fact is that there are still many challenges remaining in the quest for equality for LGBTI people in Australia. Better human rights protection of people who are sex and/or gender diverse is clearly one area where there is a compelling need for action. And there are ongoing problems. Just to give you a couple of examples, one is the need to implement some of the core recommendations of a Sex Files report, such as allowing married persons to apply to change their legal sex on their birth certificate. There's secondly a range of issues to fix in relation to health policy and services, including the costs of surgery and access to appropriate aged care. And then there are also issues specific to intersex people, such as addressing concerns about the surgical intervention on intersex infants. I'm also especially concerned about the persistence of bullying, harassment and violence towards LGBTI people in a variety of settings. And of course, in terms of discrimination on the grounds of sexuality, there are at least two areas that need change, and these are the areas of marriage equality, but also the adoption laws in some states. I take heart from the fact that a significant number of Australians now believe that civil marriage should be an option for all couples in Australia. And if you look at the recent polling, 61% of Australians believe in marriage equality. And when you drill down on that, 80% of young people believe in marriage equality. So there is a lot of momentum building. We have 3 private members' bills before the Parliament, and I'm hopeful that with the activism that's currently occurring, we will move to a situation of marriage equality. So there has been a shift in the way the Australian community thinks about gay and lesbian rights, and that's been a positive step forward. And we need to ensure that that also includes sex and gender diversity. I sense that it is time for a big leap forward, and I know that with such an engaged constituency, with so many activists, with the support of the Human Rights Commission, together we can take that next leap and we will create a fairer and more equal Australia. Thank you very much.